Witam. Dzień dobry.
Mamy coś ciekawego. Season 1 Item Tier List.
I've been playing League of Legends for around 14 years, which is just too long. In fact, the game has gone full circle and right are just calling the latest season, Season 1. Again. So let's take a look at the actual original Season 1 and all of the weird unbalanced automation that came along with it. Also, a quick disclaimer, some of the background footage might be from Season 2 just because it's really hard to find recordings of Season 1 at gold every 10 seconds. Heart of Gold gave you 200 health with the same passive, and also these two. These items would stack with each other, but not with themselves, so you could buy one of each, but you couldn't buy 6 of one and just try to passively stack gold for the whole game. They'd eventually paid themselves off around the 25-minute mark, giving some pretty big value, and they were popular on every champion, but especially supports, since they didn't typically have the luxury of last hitting and other gold generating support items hadn't been invented yet. In fact, there's even an Anivia skin where in the splash art she can be seen holding a
Nie było
Velocity
nic
Stone.
lepszego
Still in the
niż
game.
runy gold per ten. Zaczynamy z dwoma itemami. No może z kamieniem filozoficznym tylko.
To an S tier and to an A tier. This was the OG jungle item. It gave you attack damage, armor and lifesteal, but also bonus damage towards monsters. The bonus damage was a little unpredictable though, since it was a 20% chance to deal an extra 500
To ja
damage
to pamiętam. 7.1 dodatkowego złota na 10 sekund z itemem i z runami.
on attack. More importantly though, you could use it to drop a ward. Back in the day, there wasn't any trinkets, and if you wanted a ward, you had to pay for it, so this was a high value item. Solid A tier. Speaking of wards, with the absence of trinkets in old League of Legends, vision was sort of a scarcity. If you wanted vision, you had to buy a ward, and this is also why clairvoyance, a summoner spell that would be considered pretty bad by today's standards, was actually sort of popular.
An enemy has been slain.
If you're a newer player and you've ever heard people refer to control wards as pink wards, this is why. They were pink. Quite nostalgic, and it's hard to go a game without someone purchasing these, but at the same time, they're still just wards, B tier. This funny looking item provided attack speed, lifesteal.
Mimo problemu zdrowotnej drużyny podejmują nordycką formację Rudy Sak, z którym z Yamato, ze względu na obecność fragów z tego dzisiaj nie kto inny jak sam Kubon. Pojebane! Ale czemu nie Krzychu?
And armor pen. It also granted nearby allies attack speed and lifesteal. It was sort of a weird mix between a damage item and a support item, and it suited auto attack heavy champions who wanted to be in the middle of the action but could still be close enough to their team so they'd get a benefit from the aura. Whether or not you should build it was pretty dependent on your team comp, and even then it kind of got outclassed by a lot of other items anyway. D tier. Malady gave you attack speed and ability power. Each auto attack reduced the target's magic resist. Items like these used to be a lot more prominent back in the day because players were encouraged to be a lot more open with their builds. A lot of champions had AD and AP scalings together, and as a result there were some more out there items that were made to accommodate. Malady was often paired with Nash's Tooth. The item also gave attack speed and ability power, except Nash's also gave cooldown reduction in lieu of the Malady passive. Champions like Teemo or Evelynn who could benefit from AP and attack speed would often brush this duo of items. It also went pretty well on AP Xin Zhao. These items were sort of a package deal, but Nash's was a little bit more viable on a wider range of champions, so it gets A tier and Malady gets B tier. I'm going to be completely honest, I actually forgot this item existed until I started researching this video. Soul Shroud gave health, mana, and CDR, and its passive was that it granted nearby allies mana regeneration. Now, hear me out for a second. These days, this item sounds kind of useless, and honestly, in modern League it would be, but in Season 1, mana bars were more than just a cosmetic feature. Having to manage your mana was a skill in of itself, and you'd very quickly run out of mana if you just spammed your abilities without any thought. The existence of manaless champions or champions with energy, rage, or some other sort of mana alternative were also far more rare. With all that being said though, it was still a fairly niche item. D tier. Do you ever look at Medjay's Soul Stealer and think, man, I wish there was an AD equivalent to this item? It's been so many years by now, surely Riot can add an AD stacking item. I'm gonna write them an email. Actually, there already was one and they just removed it. Sort of default's only component was a longsword, and after you built it, every single takedown gave you 2 stacks, and each assist gave you 1. Each stack provided 2 flat attack damage and a 2% increase on crit damage. Upon reaching the max stacks, which was 20, you'd also get a movement speed buff. This item was cool in theory, but it never quite lived up to its AP counterpart. There's very mixed opinions on why it ended up getting removed from the game. Some people think it was too weak, while other people say it was far too strong. Then again, some people also think Yuumi is good champion design, so I guess we shouldn't trust random comments on the internet.
Dude, this champion's fucking broken!
I'm of the opinion that it actually wasn't that good on 99% of champions, and the 1% of champions it was good on, it made them too snowbally, so it wasn't really possible to balance the item because of that. Sword of the Occult gets C tier. The Doran's items, that is Doran's blade, shield, and ring, all used to behave a little bit differently. These days, it's a little unusual to see someone starting without a Doran's item. You might take Cull or maybe Longsword and refillable, but for the most part, it's safe to assume that the majority of champions will be taking a Doran's item. While D-Blade still used to be a starting item, it was a bit less common. Typical first buys used to be boots and potions, or
Jakby takie coś teraz już to byś płakał, jak Amumu na wórze coś jest broken.
Regrowth
No.
pendant if you wanted to build into
Strasznie bym płakał. Wiesz co? Skończyłbym grę na Buruz mówiąc, że kurwa coś jest broken, sam bym tego nie grał. Nara. Chures, dziękuję ślicznie. Dzień dobry, dzień
something
dobry.
like a Philostone. There was so many items that were all valid starting options. It wasn't that Doran's items were
Ten
bad,
sklep był
it was
100 razy
just
lepszy
more
jak
so
coś.
that there was so many more options depending on what playstyle you wanted that they ended up being less popular as a result. On top of this, they also served a bit of a different purpose
Jakby
than
wyszedł
what
LoL
they do
Classic,
today.
to
For
wydaje mi się, że
starters,
LigaLegend
Doran's items used to be
pikuje
stackable. Doran's blade
gracza.
even used to give health, AD and attack
Przez
speed, and
oczywiście
for a
moment, nie?
while even passive gold per 10. Their downside was that they didn't build into anything, but if you absolutely wanted to dominate your lane, it wasn't that uncommon to see someone build 2 or even 3 Doran's blades. This also sort of worked in the opposite direction, where if you were in a hard matchup and you needed to survive your lane, you could just buy a couple of Doran's blades and try to
Tak,
not
tak,
get
Błysiaczek.
pushed
No,
out of
no,
lane.
może powiedzieć, że wygraliśmy 2, a nawet 3, ale
As
koniec końców
time went
wygraliśmy
on, this fell
1,5.
out of popularity, apart from that one brief time in Season 9 where Misfortune with Klepto and 5 Doran's Blade was being played by LCK players, but we're talking about Season 1 today, so the AP equivalent to this item was Doran's Ring, and it gave AP, health, and flat mana, and later on it also got given passive mana regeneration. Doran's Shield gave you health, armor, and health
Stakowanie
regen.
butów piękna
Doran's
sprawa?
Blade gets A tier, and
Jakie
Ring and
stakowanie
Shield get
butów?
B tier. Will of the Ancients built out of Hextech Revolver and Amplifying Tome. It gave 40 flat AP, but it also had a
Boże,
passive aura
spell
that
wam
would
to
give
jest
all
takie
allied
OP.
champions around you a bonus 30 AP and eventually 20% spell vamp after the item got a couple of buffs. For the most
Wota-
part, it was
Wota,
pretty niche
jak były-
because the other AP
Stary,
choices
Wota
in
to
the
był
game
taki
were just
pojebany
bad.
item,
However, there
pamiętam.
is one champion who may have already popped into your head who could use this item to its full potential, Vladimir. In fact, it
Nieprawda,
was that
pulpecik,
much more
sam czas
popular to the
powiem.
point that Will of the Ancients got built 40 times more often on Vladimir than any other champion in the game. This item was essentially just for him. However, if you weren't on Vladimir, there were just other better AP options.
Chyba się na Arena
Still
budowało.
to this day, Atma's Impaler is one of the most gold efficient items to have ever been a part of League of Legends. It was a 2300 gold item that gave 45 armor
Jezu, ale
and
to było
15% crit
broken.
chance, which doesn't sound all that good until you see its passive. Gain bonus attack damage equal to 1.5% of your maximum health. Just note that this is maximum health, not bonus health. All champions have between 1260 and 1764 base health at level 13. Therefore, this item was cost efficient for every champion in the game by level 13 just off base health alone. Combined with a
Katarinka.
health stacking champion like Cho'Gath or the item that we're going to talk about next, and it was a pretty good combo, A tier. So we've already discussed that alongside Medjai's Soul Stealer, there was also an AD stacking item, but that wasn't all. Leviathan was a 1275 gold item that built out of Ruby Crystal. It gave 215 health, and for every kill, you gained 2 stacks, and for every assist, you gained 1, and each stack gave you 37.5 health up to a cap of 20. When you add 20 stacks, your champion takes 15% less damage. This item was fucked. With Medjai's and Sword of the Occult, there was some inherent risk to buying them, because if you died, you lost your stacks. Yes, you got stronger, but you could still get caught out because you were squishy. The way to counter a tank who bought Leviathan was to kill them, but the very strength of the item was that it made you harder to kill, so it made it extremely low risk purchase when compared to its 2 relatives. On top of this, it also had a bug that never got fixed for almost its entire lifespan in the game, where it would also reduce true damage. It even got a buff for a little bit where assists would give the same amount of stacks as kills, so it would just stack even faster. When it was at full stacks, it gave more health than even a Warmogs, and the damage reduction passive combined with the true damage reduction bug just made this a really obnoxious item. Because of how annoying
Szczerze?
it was to play
Zagrałbym sobie takie 3 itemy stakujące na jakimś, nie wiem, na Akali, nie. Na Akali bym sobie zagrał.
against, I really want to give it F
Dzisiaj
tier,
Liga
but
czy Szachy,
unfortunately
dzisiaj jest koniec streama za godzinę. Dlatego dzisiaj nic nie ma. Oprócz pogadanki i Disa. No ja muszę wyjść z chaty.
S tier. Frozen Mallet built out of Phage and a Giant's Belt. It gave 800 health and 30 AD, but it had a unique passive that gave your physical attacks a 2.25 seconds slow. It was pretty commonly seen on top laners that lacked some sort of dash or CC and needed to stick to their opponents, and it was often built alongside Atma's Impaler for the AD bonus. It was sort of like the AD version of Rylai's, A tier. Force of Nature was a bit of a strange item, since it was the only one to give movement speed and health regen in one item at the same time.
Eryk, kurwo debilu, nie pisz tak idioto jebany w ogóle. Jesteś pojebany? Co ty piszesz, kurwa, co ty piszesz? Mam dzwonić na policję, żeby ci na chatę się wpierdolili? Jakie adresy masz? Kurwa, powiem gościu... Jak to ma kurwa na imię, na nazwisko? A, ty masz kurwa to pojebane nazwisko. Chudziński, kurwa. Stary. Normalnie mówię tak, kurwa, Eryk Chudziński z Piły, kurwa, człowieku. Dzwoni na policję. Chudziński, ale przez samo H jeszcze. A, sorry, kurwa. Może ktoś nie wiedział w sumie, jak masz na nazwisko. No ale dobra, no jakby każdy zna Eryka, nie? Literówka ma w nazwisku, kurwa. Nie ziadybałem. Nie, PSL-u nie chcemy. Dobra, czekaj, kogo jeszcze zlikujemy? Piotr Libera, to on. Aleksander Kardaś, kurwa.
Time. It got removed fairly early, and funnily enough, a revised version of it got re-added to the game in Season 10. This is its passive these days. I'm not reading all that. Back in the day though, it restored 1.5 max health every second while under 50% health, and it built out of 2 regrowth pendants and a Negatron cloak. This item was a mage's worst nightmare. It ended up being removed fairly early on in the game's lifespan, just before Season 3, and its power ended up getting transferred across to other items instead. The health regen passive was gradually reworked into the Warmogs that we have today, and Spirit Visage gained some of the extra MR so players still had a decent anti-AP option, B tier. Tenacity is one of the only stats in League of Legends that, apart from these boots, you cannot purchase. That was apart from these 3 items. Cloak and Dagger, built out of a Cloak and Dagger. Wow. It gave 20% attack speed, 20% crit chance, and 35%
Ale to był broken.
tenacity. Moonflare Spellblade built out of a blasting wand and 430 gold. It gave 50 AP and 25 tenacity. Elisa's Miracle gave health and mana regen, tenacity, and it built out of Philostone. It's hard to give a bad rating to any item that gives tenacity, but it's a 1450 gold item that doesn't build into anything and it just takes up space in your inventory. Cloak and Dagger F tier, and the other 2 get D tier. We've touched on Warmogs a couple of times now, and it's always been a massive health item, but its passive has undergone some variations. Back in Season 1, its passive gave you permanent bonus health and health regen each time you killed a minion. Something we haven't touched on yet in this video though somehow is that unique items, meaning that you can only buy one of them, weren't very popular in Season 1. And I don't mean that like people didn't build them, I mean that unique items weren't really a thing. Some items had unique passives and Warmogs was one of them, but if you wanted to do something like buy 4 Warmogs and then Atmas for the AD buff, nothing was really stopping you, B tier. A lot of these old Season 1 items have been removed and then reworked in some way and then reintroduced to the game, but one item that doesn't really have a modern equivalent is Sword of the Divine. It was a 2170 gold item that built out of recurve bow and dagger. It gave 60% attack speed, as you would imagine, but it also had an active for 5 seconds. Your basic attacks cannot be dodged, and you gain 30% armor pen.
Jace, the Sword of Divine.
Was actually a bigger deal in Old League because of the existence of dodge as a stat. Phantom Dancer, Ninja Tabbies, Jax E, Nidalee R, Udyr passive, just to name a few, all gave percentage chance to dodge basic attacks. The item got removed at the start of Season 2 because dodge as a stat got removed, rendering the item kind of useless, but it returned a while later with the active that most people know it for, which was granting 100% bonus attack speed and 100% crit strike for your next 3 basic attacks. C tier. Hextech Gunblade gave 45 AD, 55 AP, 15% lifesteal, and 12% spell vamp. If you saw these stats on an item these days, you'd probably have some questions. Why is there AD on this item? Why is there AP on this item? What is spell vamp? Why are my parents getting divorced? Champions like Akali and Katarina used to be able to build hybrid. Their abilities would scale off AD and AP, so it was pretty common for them to build both at the same time. Gunblade's active would deal 300 magic damage and slow the target champion by 50% for 3 seconds, which made it great for melee champions that built hybrid and also needed to stick onto their targets. Spell Vamp as a stat was also pretty unique. You'd heal off your abilities whether they do physical or magic damage. As time went on, Riot stated that they don't really like the idea of hybrid champions because they're innately difficult to balance, so over the years they've adjusted champions to be mostly optimized for one stat at a time, but Gunblade is still iconic. S tier. Ionic Spark used to be more than just an item in TFT. It got added on the same patch as Dominion. Rest in peace. It gave 50% attack speed and 250 health. You might be thinking, health and attack speed is a pretty weird combination, and that was sort of its main downfall as an item. Its passive was that every 4th attack would unleash a chain of lightning that did 125 magic damage to up to 4 targets within 400 radius of each other. It was sort of the predecessor to Static Shiv. It very rarely got built and was mostly limited to top laners who wanted to split push and could also benefit from the attack speed and health, like Shen or Volibear. Again, it wasn't really a bad item, but the competition here is pretty tough. D tier. Elixir of Fortitude, the old red pot, used to get used in early game as a cheese item. It only cost 250 gold, and upon activating it, you'd instantly gain 20 AD and 350 health. It was commonly seen on top laners who wanted to try and get an early lead by grabbing first blood. You could buy it as your starting item and try to bait your opponent into a fight and then pop it to gain an extra 350 health out of nowhere. B tier. Abyssal Scepter gave 70 AP and 70 magic resist, but it also had a passive aura that would reduce the magic resist of any enemy within 1000 range by 40.
No, not even.
If you're
Not even
wondering how long 1000 range is, it's the one on the left. Pretty big. This was originally intended as an item to be built on AP bruisers or tanks, but because the range was so long, it just sort of ended up being built on anyone who wanted AP and MR. It rightfully ended up being nerfed to the range that you can see on the right, but that was during Season 2, and after rank it's Season 1 A tier. This item seems innocuous at first glance. It built out of Catalyst and Mana Manipulator, and it gave 430 health and 450 mana. Its passive though was that whenever you use an ability, you regenerate 50 health and 20 mana over 2 seconds. Champions like Soraka, Zhonya, and especially Udyr would buy this item and subsequently become unkillable. There's actually a pretty iconic show match where Udyr built this item alongside Spirit Visage and Force of Nature, and he could genuinely walk 1v5 under tower and still not die. It ended up being removed from the game before Season 1 was even over, and a lot of people cite this specific match as the reason why it got removed.
Now they stop and turn around. Oh, this is very dangerous. There is Pen in the middle of everything, and they're still waiting for Amumu and Soraka to gain in. And yes, they have dropped down Morgana, and this is very, very dangerous. The Ionians are in very good shape right now. This Vladimir is alone, and Edwy has dropped down. That is 3 dead Noxians. Ionia is still 5 strong. They're trying to jump down onto Singe. Can they do this? He's leaving a poison trail behind him. That will hurt the rest of these Ionian champions. But no, they are still diving down into the space. Will Singe drop down? They have exhausted Ashe, and yes, there it is, a legendary.
One of the most broken items in League history. S tier. Zhonya's ring built out of a blasting wand and a needlessly large rod. It gave 120 AP, and as you might have guessed, its active was to put you in stasis for 2 seconds. However, at this point in time, not only was Hourglass not an item, but neither was Rabadon's Death Cap. So the Rabadon's passive was just on Zhonya's instead. Alongside having the stasis active, it also passively increased your total AP by 25%. Imagine the 2 items fused together, and that was basically Zhonya's ring. Halfway through Season 1, in the patch where Caitlyn was released, Zhonya's ring was split into 2 separate items, Zhonya's Hourglass and Rabadon's Death Cap. However, for the time it existed, it was an absolutely monstrous item. S tier.
Chciałbym zobaczyć twoją reakcję, jak taki Udyr na ciebie by grał. Stary, tego Udyra to normalnie spotkasz w kolejce nowadays. Daj mu 2 itemy, pół itema przewagi.
Madred's bloodrazor built out of pickaxe, recurve bow, and Madred's razor, which was another old item that gave you a...
Dobra, czas tematu obrusie.
Tamten item broken albo tamten item broken, a prawda jest taka, że to są twoje czasy, w których chuj wielki pokazałeś i wyjebali cię z rodcat.
Nie, to są czasy, kiedy nawet nie było leca.
Attack speed. Bloodrazor gave you damage, attack speed, and armor, and its passive was that it made your basic attacks deal 3% percentage max health damage on hit. It was a little bit of a niche item, but the champions that it was good on, it was really good on. Anyone who could synergize with the passive through on-hit effects like Warwick with his ult, Renekton W, Shyvana Q, and so on could build this item with some pretty good results. A tier. Deathfire Grasp gets F tier.
Bam.
Wait, that's not. One of the most iconic
Okay.
items in League history, DFG originally built out of Kage's Lucky Pick and Fiendish Codex.
Taki
Its
wam był
active
chyba.
was to deal magic damage to the target champion equal to 25% of their current health, plus 3% per 100 ability power with a minimum of 200 damage. Its cooldown was only 1 minute. This means that if you played Veigar, for example, and you got to 1000 AP, you'd be doing a total of 55% of someone's health with a point and click item on a 1 minute cooldown. At the end of 2009, the base damage actually got buffed from 25% to 30%, so it did even more. I feel like this item is so iconic that it should actually get its own dedicated video, so I guess if you want to see that, then subscribe so YouTube shows it to you when it comes out. S tier. Oracle's Elixir used to be a consumable alongside red,
Ej,
blue, and green.
to było totalnie
We'll talk
broken.
about in just
To
a
było
second. It gave you true
niezbalansowane
sight, letting you
fest.
see things like Teemo Shrooms, wards, and even stealthed champions like Akali and her Shroud. The one difference between this and the other elixirs is
Wystarczyło
that
nie umierać.
Oracles didn't expire until you died. This made it pretty strong. A tier. Alright, we're now like 17 minutes into this video and I've just realized there is still a bunch of items that I
No.
have to put into the tier list, so we're
Nie tak,
just
nie
going to do
mogłeś
them
kogoś
all
zabić
very
na GG,
quickly and
jakiegoś
then rate them
leśnika.
at the end. Green Pot, or Elixir of Agility, was the crit strike and attack speed version of Red and Blue Pot. Archangel's Staff had the same core gameplay of mana stacking for AP, but it wasn't unique, so you could just buy a bunch of them if you wanted for maximum stacking. Black Cleaver used to give attack speed, alongside these stats. Rylai's used to be procced similar to how Lichbane works today. You'd cast a spell and then your next basic attack would apply the slow. However, in 2009 it received one of the first ever item reworks into something more similar to what it is today. Randuin's also used to give cooldown reduction,
gadasz o
and
qualitowy.
alongside slowing the movement of your enemies with the items active, it also applied an auto attack slow which scaled based off your armor and magic resist. Frozen Heart is relatively similar to the version we have today. Same with Thornmail, except the return damage was a percentage of how much damage you took rather than a flat amount. Phantom Dancer used to give a 20% chance to dodge incoming basic attacks until that got removed halfway through Season 1. The same patch that Innovating Locker was removed from the game. Rod of Ages used to give mana, health, and ability power
Powiem wam, jak te itemy bazowały wszystko na docie, nie?
from the game. Rod of Ages used to give mana, health, and ability power every minute
Dosłownie
after
gierka
buying the item
skatowana
up
1
to
do
a
1.
stack of 10. Guardian Angel has always remained relatively the same, but this is what it used to look like. For a while, Last Whisper used to give attack speed, and its passive was that it had a chance to deal 1 magic damage for each point of armor that the
Tylko
target
Dota?
had.
No bo
This
gdyby-
was later changed
gdyby
into
nie Dota,
something
to
more
nie
similar
było-
to
nie
the
było
item
nas.
that we have today,
Bo tutaj
and this
teraz.
also happened on the same patch that Innovating Locker was removed. The active for Yumi's Ghostblade also used to grant attack speed. Attacking while the item was active could extend the duration of the buff. Bloodthirster used to be a stacking item. Each minion that you killed would grant you some AD and lifesteal, and you could stack this up to 40 times. When you died though, you'd lose your stacks and you'd have to go restack it again before a fight if you wanted to get its full effectiveness. Banshee's Veil has always been fairly similar, but it used to give mana due to its old build path consisting of Catalyst. Sunfire Cave's passive used to just do 35 magic damage per second, a little bit simpler than whatever the hell this
było
is.
combo.
Spirit Visage has always had the enhanced
wiadomym
regen passive, but it used to be a really cheap item, costing around 1200 to 1500 gold. Trinity Force used to be a mega item, costing more than 4000 gold and giving these stats. Morello's
było,
Evil
tak
Tome,
było.
the old name for Morellonomicon,
Szkoda.
used to give these stats. This is the old Gwynsu's
Ale
Rageblade.
co no?
Once again, a similar concept, but with a considerably shorter passive. Medjai's used to give more AP per stack, and the bonus for max stacks was cooldown reduction rather than a move speed bonus. And then finally we have Shirelia's, which used to be a pure support item rather than giving AP like its successor does. Alright, thank you for sitting through that. I suppose it's time to rate these items.
Runy uników w pierwszym sezonie to było coś pięknego. Nie. Coś pięknego to był 1% kryta.